Welcome to the Microsoft Security Insight Show. The show streams live at 5 every Wednesday evening on YouTube and Twitch and streamed directly into your ear the following Monday. Hosted by Edward Walton, Andrea Fisher, Rod Trent, and Brody Castle, the Microsoft Security Insight Show provides information, news, and tips on Microsoft security solutions.
Recorded December 7th, 2022. Good evening, Brody. Good evening, Andrea. Good evening, Rod. And good evening to our esteemed guest, and really evening, Thomas. Brody, how you doing?
I'm doing not too shabby. It warmed up 20 degrees overnight, so it's beautiful 0 out, just beautiful t-shirt weather. Loving it. It's been a fantastic week so far. I'm working hard on a number of items, including some Defender for cloud and server stuff, which actually, Andrea, I might pick your brain and see if I can wedge 30 minutes into your calendar to ask you some tough questions. And what else? I'm getting involved in a whole bunch of really interesting information protection projects at the architect level coming up. And this week has been Airlift, right? For everybody internally at Microsoft, catching up on Airlift and all of the amazing presentations from our product and program teams around what's new, all kinds of stuff we can't tell you about because it's under NDA, haha. And it's all really exciting. There's so much cool stuff coming down. I mean, especially device control in the MDE XDR space. There's so much really cool stuff in that space. And syntax, document, what's it called? Yeah, leveraging our cloud and AI environment to decipher and correlate different documents on the information protection side. That was pretty cool to learn about. There's so much stuff. It's like internal. Oh man, I just lost the name of the major event that Rod promised he'd fly us to, but he couldn't.
We're ready? Ignite,
yeah, it's like internal Ignite for Microsoft. It's great, and I get to ask a bunch of questions. Oh, and Mark Simos was talking about his CISO workshop, and I got to ask him a few questions, and it's just like, cool. I get to talk to Mark Simos. You know,
did you ask him the most important question? Why are you big timing, Mark?
I know. Well, we're working on our FY or our 2023 guests, and Mark had a conflict. And I'm sure he'll want to come back on in the new year in the early spring. So I'll turn those wrenches for us, Edward. Absolutely. And that's all that's for me. I could talk all day. It's been a busy week. I love it. Everything's really
good. Andrea, what about yourself?
Hey, same thing as Mr. Brody. It has been the Airlift this week because he said it's some internal training. So I've been going to sessions, trying to learn some new stuff, leading a couple of sessions. Had our annual Ladies of Tampa Microsoft holiday dinner. Oh. That is all the excitement around here.
Okay, yeah. I mean, we're starting to get into that, you know. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Rod, what about yourself, man? Is that a Atomic Red Team from Red Canary? I started putting that on today. I didn't put it on.
Yeah, it is. It's one of my favorite T-shirts. It's so soft, man. It's just it's like a security hug. That's what it is.
Like a security blanket.
Yeah, it is. It feels really nice. It's good to sleep in too. That's as far as I'll go with that. Hey, so it's been an interesting week for me, and in fact, talking about that, trying to get to the end of the year thing, I have one more major thing next week to do in Milwaukee, and then after that, I disappear, except for, of course, our show. This week I was, and I don't know if any of you have ever been to our executive briefing center in Redmond. It's an interesting place. Even with your employee blue badge, you can't get into it unless you are part of one of the engagements there. I didn't realize that until I got there, and sure enough, you have to have a special little sticker. But once you get into this place, oh my goodness, it's amazing. Absolutely love the place. Had never been there before. Hope to go back here shortly. In fact, the customer that I was with, their rep, they're from the UK, their rep, she's going to have me back in April sometime. So it's going to be cool.
Yeah, Andrea and I visited before. I believe that's the place we had the best bacon of our life.
Oh
my God, I don't know what they did to the pigs before they cooked them and after, but it was so tasty.
I still dream about it.
we were making bacon sandwiches. We would take like bacon and put bacon in the middle, and then put some bacon on top of it, and then we would garnish it with bacon. It was so good, good stuff. Now myself, not too much. I'm sort of got pulled into a bunch of proof of concepts that are going sideways. One of them was a little bit out of my water, so friend of the show, been on the show, Matt Egan, he's probably going to jump in. But I'm also getting ready to kick off a MDI and a MDA proof of use, proof of concept for a customer. They've completed the MDE, so I'm doing that, prepping for that. At the same time, I find myself doing some architectural diagrams because I'm finding more of my customers, the big ones, like big, they have multiple business units. The security team for some of these are deciding they want to add like an internal SOC and build back to the subscriptions of app dev, things like that, so that when these people are saying, hey, we need to secure this, we need to dump our application insight logs into this, or we need to dump, up and down capability around our infrastructure, or, VMware statistics. Security team, like, who's going to pay for that? So what they're doing is they're figuring out a way to have an internal MSSP model with distributed, or how it is. You put a log analytics workspace to the tenant and subscription that they do. So I've been working on that for both helping a partner out as well as customers doing it. And there's a very large customer that's doing it now. I can't mention their name because they're not happy with us. And I wouldn't be either. But I'm doing that. I'm doing some writing. I was 1 day away from letting my SC200 expire.
Oh, really? How is that possible? We wrote it at the same time, didn't we? Mine's coming up in like January, so I got time.
I thought so. Something came. I said, hey, you need to get this done. Because I said, remember, I got on the show and I bragged I had taken care of all of them, and then I get this stupid thing. So
all of those are starting to come through already.
Yeah.
Kind of crazy.
Yeah. Gearing up to take the
do that though.
The AZ104. Brody is too.
No, I'm not. No, I'm not gonna do it.
You're gonna do it, and you're gonna.
No, I'm not. I'm not gonna do it. No,
well,
I'm gonna do the SC100. That's what I'll do, and then maybe the AZ500. Maybe I think that's more applicable.
Yeah. I thought you already wrote that exam.
No, it's not quite cold. It's like Chris. I love doing it around slow time, which is like the last 2 weeks of December when everybody's just snoring, and I got time to do it. But I'm also looking at some some non-Microsoft certs, like a few industry mentors recommended the CISM from ISACA. So I've already got my CISSP. So, but apparently and I've heard consistently that's a good one. So, and then the CCSP Cloud Security.
Yeah, that's a good one.
It's a good one. Yeah. So just looking at those, right?
Yeah.
Speaking of security, speaking of exams, by the way, I have to talk about this for just a sec. SC200, they're getting ready to rewrite this exam. So if you want to take it quick, and AZ500 as well. But there's actually a survey if you go here, and you can help drive the content for SC200. Anyone can. I'll be sending this link out in the newsletter, but those that are here can kind of take advantage of that. I'll put it in the chat here in just a second.
Yeah, Frank told me something about that. I talked to him in between him feeding and petting kangaroos. I'm working on that SANS GX cert, the 555, the 104 Azure certification, the CISM is on my radar. I wrote it on the board actually. I've already done the CCSP.
How'd you like it compared to the CISSP, which I know you have, and it's been a while since you've written that?
You would think it's cloud and agnostic, but there's a lot of references around AWS and stuff like that, so that when they do pivot to a particular cloud solution, you can tell it's AWS. But a lot of stuff I did not know around, SOC 1, SOC 2, SOC 3, all these, regulatory compliances, where you are in the process and stuff like that. And oddly enough, technical people struggle with that exam.
Right.
Non-technical, like all the salespeople I supported, they all passed it on the first time.
Really? That's interesting.
Probably
yeah, well, I had
probably a little bit of overthinking, I would imagine, for technical.
Yeah, because there was some questions on there that are flat out wrong. Like that's.
Yeah. Oh, I've seen that. Yeah.
That's not right. So,
Would you
but no,
recommend it, Edward? Would you recommend getting it, or is it like, eh?
I recommend you getting it as a stepping stone to your CISSP if you don't already have it. Right.
Okay.
Two reasons. It gets you used to taking that type of exam, right? And it has some good knowledge. I think everybody on this call is a little bit senior for it, but people are asking for it. You're starting to see certain certifications being asked for, in CVs and resumes out there, right? Plus, I had a free voucher.
Oh, well, that's nice because it's normally like $400, so that's sweet. Yeah.
And I think I sent Andrea the official course material, right?
You did.
Send to me as well. Perfect. You can be study buddies.
I may have another book left. I actually set the training. It was a week-long training. So, well, anyway.
Oh, nice guys.
Well, without further ado,
hey,
we're almost at.
Before we jump into our guest, and since you mentioned Andrea, I think we should absolutely highlight her for a couple things that she's done recently.
Yes.
All right. She's written this article, which is absolutely fabulous, because we are going to start a huge promotion around MFA for everyone here shortly within Microsoft. Is MFA the vegetable cybersecurity? Not only that, but she's wearing some KQL merch. So, Andrea, you want to tell us about this article?
Yeah, I'll just tell you, it's so funny even how it came about. I'm friends with one of the women in marketing, and my undergraduate degree is in journalism. So sometimes when they need some extra proofreaders because they're busy, I will proofread something for them. And I told her, I was like, if I have to read one more article about turning on MFA, I'm going to kill myself. And I was like, why won't people just do it? And she said, it's like eating your vegetables. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to write, is MFA, I was going to say the broccoli of cybersecurity, but we changed it to vegetable for the broccoli lovers out there. And that's really where it came from. That was the impetus of the idea is, I think there are so many misconceptions about MFA, right? It's going to be too hard on my end users. It's too hard to set up, all of those things. So we just wanted to talk about those myths. And, we also know now, I wish everybody was forcing it via conditional policies, Security Muncher, but you will be surprised how many people are absolutely not. I can tell you how many of my customers don't have it on at all or only have it on for admins.
And some of them just wonder why. Why do I even need that? So you still have to.
Listening to Ann Johnson and Vasujikal and Brent Arsenault and like everybody going on all the social media platforms being like MFA, and all the other vendors, right?
Exactly why it's the vegetable, right? We all know we should be eating our vegetables, but what do we like? We like corn. We like sweet potatoes because they're all tasty and good for us. So
I like broccoli. I like spinach. I think not even listening to the industry peers, I look at by example. I don't think there's a major bank would allow you to do online banking without MFA turned on. Yep. And so, if you're doing this in your, to protect your personal assets and everything else, not in your job, and then it's never really one of those things, all or nothing. You can make so many sub-test groups to figure out the actual process before you actually get into deploying it. And all it is communication. Yes. Get you a bunch of friendlies. Sometimes they're tech people, but they don't give the best troubleshooting because when something goes wrong, they know how to fix it. You go to the next set of friendlies. They come in, they need a little bit more help. And then you go to some that are absolutely, not power users, just the everyday, technology worker, information worker. And so you can roll this out. You instead of going enforce, you can go enable. You could. There's so many ways you can get it out there. You could, if your devices are mass, managed, you can push down the Microsoft Authenticator app. People not doing it, and I'm gonna tell you what'll change it. Heard it here first. If cybersecurity policies say that we will not pay you out unless you have some type of authentication framework that includes insurance, we're not going to insure you, or they'll insure you because I got some friends that underwrite this. The whole goal, and I'm not going to badmouth any of the cybersecurity, underwriters and insurance companies. This is not what this is for, but I found it more often than not, their progress from the time that you submit an incident is figuring out how not to pay you. They're going to go through your stuff.
Yeah. Well, it's like you leave the keys in the car and the car unlocked, right? It's just like that. Same with your house, right? It's just like you So I agree with you, Edward. There needs to be a minimum level of security, and it's not passwords, people. It's not.
Well, and a lot of customers, and I saw it in the chat too, Microsoft should turn this on by default. We can't turn anything on by default. There's so many customers that would just rake us over the coals. We have to make recommendations and provide guidance. That's the only thing that we can actually do.
Well, even, one of the struggles we have, and Thomas, we're talking for a long time. Feel free if you have an opinion here to jump in before we've even introduced you, but we've been talking a long time. But like a lot of my state and local government customers, either they can't afford something like an RSA token, right? Those external tokens, and they can't force somebody to put something on their personal phone.
That is a big one.
If I can't afford it and I can't put it on something I already has, how am I going to do it? Right. They can't afford YubiKeys. I mean, so there's just a lot of reasons why. I mean, I wish we could turn it on for everybody or turn it on by default and make people back it off. Right. It sort of became the go-to thing for 401ks and things like that. But yeah, I wish it would be something that we could do.
At least SMS for those scenarios, right, Andrea? At least SMS. It's not the best, but at least it's something. Yeah. Thomas, how about you? We'd love to hear all about yourself. How about you do your introduction? Tell us.
Let Ed do it, man.
You want to do it, Ed? Okay, I was just.
Can I do my job?
Get excited.
Canadians are
He has the Canadian thing. Yeah. Okay.
It's t-shirt weather there, so
it is. Yeah, I'm in my shorts right now. You can't see that. Edward, would you like to introduce our guest Thomas, who would love to chime in on Azure Active Directory based security?
Absolutely. Herr Thomas, guten Nacht, wie geht's?
Wie geht es sehr gut. How are you doing? It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So I'd like to introduce our guest, Thomas Naunheim. Brody, eat it.
I'm actually impressed. I'm impressed.
There you go. It's transparency. Thomas and I worked on this all day yesterday to say his name right. We kept working on it. We were talking. So Thomas, I would never be able to do justice to introducing you. You and I had a great conversation. I'm a fan of you on LinkedIn. I watch your stuff. I reuse some of your wording when I was talking to a customer about this POC for MBI and MBA. So please do an introduction to our listeners and our guests.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Thomas Naunheim. I'm our cloud security architect and Microsoft MVP for Azure from Koblenz, Germany. I'm working for Click and Kanya GAB, which is a Microsoft partner in Germany. And I have a strong focus on identity and security in Azure. So both our topics are very close to my heart. As part of my job, I'm supporting customers to implement Microsoft Cloud security stack solutions, but also help them to secure their cloud infrastructure when it comes to identity, access management, but also about Azure security posture. And I'm also an active member of the community, running an Azure Meetup and also having community talks about Azure AD security, which is one of my favorite topics. And it was also interesting to see an increasing requests from the community about learning best practices and also some considerations in securing Azure AD, because there's increasing adoption rate, in my opinion, when it comes over the last 2-3 years with the pandemic situation. Especially in Germany, we have some concerns about the cloud in the past, but that has also changed in the recent years. And we are also running at Click and Kanya Cloud Security Operations Center to monitoring and supporting our customers in security incident management, and also having preventive and reactive services.
Well, when you and I communicated, when I reached out to you, you suggested 4 related but unique or different topics, and there was no way we could get through this in an hour and a half, 2 hours. So we decided, you and I yesterday, let's break this up into 2 parts. So of the 4 topics, I know that the 2 that you want to talk about today, we're going to have a part 2 of this where we talk about the other 2, and then we're going to bring it all together and say, hey, this is how you secure your authentication fabric and your posture, right? And things going on. So if you need to present something, please go ahead. But if you just want to talk about it and give us a verbal journey of, hey, this is what you need to do, And I believe one of the first things you want to talk about was posture and hardening of Azure Active Directory, and as well as AD, especially if you have AD Connect involved in your migration path. Please.
Yeah, I think we already started a great conversation about MFA. And if we take a look on security in Azure AD, and I think it's really important that we understand what could be the attack surface that exists for our users in Azure AD environment. And what is one of my favorite approaches to analyze the attack surface is to think about techniques and tactics that could be used by attackers. And if we take a look, for example, on initial access or credential access, we already mentioned MFA, right? And that is something what is really still in a low adoption rate. It seems so when we take a look on the statistics. But in my opinion, we need to go a step forward. So even customers that have turned on MFA using Authenticator app, nowadays they need to consider the additional security options. For example, in the last couple of months, topics like MFA hammering has raised up. So not only our using MFA is important, it is also important to think about the security options of the MFA methods. And that includes, for example, even customers that are having a passwordless adoption with Windows Hello for Business should consider, hey, is there a TPM in place so that the keys of Windows Hello for Business are protected by a hardware cryptography provider? And so if you take a look on the whole security landscape in your Azure AD environment, you should start by very first beginning about analyzing what are the authentication methods that are in use that I have also enabled as authentication methods. And as part of my zero trust approach, I should also consider to verify explicitly what are the methods that are used. We have now the authentication strength as a conditional access configuration. And if I have configured that most of my users should use Windows Hello for Business, then hey, you should also consider that in your conditional access policy design.
Yeah, well put. I think, when we work with customers on the initial rollout for tenants, which doesn't happen as much anymore, it used to more back in the day when the cloud was new and fresh, but still you see it. There are minimum security benchmarks that we need to implement, including what you're talking about here, Thomas. MFA at a minimum for administrators, hopefully for everybody, conditional access policies, strong authentication practices, etc. And there's those table stakes that are just that baseline every customer, regardless of your industry, needs to employ at a minimum. Would you agree with that statement?
Yeah, and I think there was one comment by the audience, which was really, I think, a good underlying statement. For example, if we're talking about conditional access, it must be clear that conditional access is our zero trust policy engine and is the heart of the whole implementation when it comes to verify specific conditions and enforce our controls in the Azure AD environment. And I think there's a great analogy when it comes to conditional access and GPS. GPS is a good signal or good thing if you have multiple signals. So satellites coordinates what is the position. And that's also for conditional access. You should rely not only on a single factor or a single condition, you should include as much signal as you have, like the device security. Is it device compliant? What about device risk? What is your strong authentication? Is it the phishing resistant or not? And also have the signals from identity protection in place. So it's really important to have a full enriched signal set in conditional access. And in my opinion, a really strong baseline in place. So a minimum one policy for every user, for every app, so that you have not a Swiss cheese, and there's some room that attackers or users can bypass your policies.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned a couple of things where you were saying strong authentication. Is that something that's implemented, or is that just is that the result of turning on MFA, a series of things? Define a little bit of strong authentication, and can strong authentication be achieved without MFA?
Yeah, in my opinion, strong authentication is only strong if you consider multiple things and not only have turned on MFA. So we need to consider what is the way how the user register MFA. Because if it's very easy to register MFA without any restriction or have no secure method for registering MFA, then how secure is your second factor? Because that was something what happens also in the recent month, that more and more new accounts for people that hired on a later date have been pre-created, and there was no MFA registration policy. And so the attacker was able to guess the initial password and then have an account take over before the employee starts on their first day. Mm-hmm. So the whole process about user onboarding, how MFA could be registered, that is, I think, also part of a strong authentication, because we should also verify how the user is able to register MFA. And finally, it's the question about do we are protecting them from MFA hammering, like using authentication, number matching with the Authenticator app. And also, what is about token security? Even I have a strong authentication in place. If I'm using an unsecured device, and it's very easy to replay the token from the device, how secure is the authentication after the process has been made?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, when you look at it, though, I see the need. And you got to realize we're practitioners, right? And not necessarily line of business and operations. But let me ask you this question. It seems that Microsoft, it takes it seriously, but they don't, because there's a huge discrepancy of the feature set between P1 and P2 in Azure AD. Mm-hmm. I'm thinking P1 shouldn't exist, right? You could have the E3 SKU, but maybe introduce P2 as part of that to make sure that that's secure, right? And then you just don't you have a differentiator between both of those SKUs. One of my favorite things that's part of P2 is Azure Active Directory Identity Protection, and I think I read from the tech community that now those alerts are surfacing in the M365 Defender portal, yeah, which is a blessing and a curse, because it's noisy. Until you tune it, and so it's a two-part question. Is there any benefit to P1? And this is subjective, opinionated. And should everybody be on P2 to take advantage of that? And the part two of that question is, in Azure Active Directory Identity Protection, why is it that I can't create my own risky user and sign in policies? I got to use this one thing. Because people are like, well, I need to create multiple policies, and maybe I don't know what I'm doing, but is that possible? Let's do number two first and work backwards. Can I create multiple risky sign-on and user risk policies, or do I have to have this and just assign it to groups?
I would say it could make sense to have different sign-in or user risk policies, because maybe you like to have different risk level and enforced controls, because for different group of users, for example, when a regular user with the work accounts has a sign-in risk, maybe you like to have the self-remediation options, like enforcing MFA or resetting password if the user risk is high. But if it comes to a privilege account, maybe you like to have different controls, because then you like to block further access, because even a password reset is, from your point of view, not a good security control to have a self-remediation. So when it comes to risk or risk policies, I would expect it could be scenarios where it makes sense to have different policies in conditional access. I would also prefer to move over from identity protection risk policies to the conditional access based policies because of the flexible options that we have about assigning them to specific groups.
Yeah, the only way I found the flexibility is going the latter route. The conditional access policies, they can get very granular because the default policy there is like, maybe I don't know, I can't figure it out. I'm like, it's just one, and you can assign it to different Azure AD groups. But like, what if I want some people that I want them to be remediated at a medium, and some people at high, and I haven't figured out how to do that. But in conditional access, it's easy.
Yeah,
you can do the policy. So I think that's a limitation in the product. Let's go back to question 1. Is there value in P1, or to get the max value in protection landscape, do I need to be in P2?
I'm also a big fan of identity protection, so I would always go with P2, especially with additional feature set, because when it comes to adoption of zero trust to Azure AD, we have not only verify explicitly, we have also least privilege approach. And with P2, as far as I know, we have also the opportunity for identity governance to have features like access review, access packages. And when we talk about posture management in Azure AD, it means also to have a regular review about assigned permissions, right? And to reduce the attack surface, and we have no accounts with overprivileged permissions. They have it on a temporary basis. This is something with PIM for privileged accounts, which will be very helpful and is also part of P2. And even with features like privileged access groups, we can also have just-in-time membership for security groups. And I think this additional feature set makes it very valuable, very interesting to use P2. And prefer that over P1.
Yeah, I saw a read come across about the privileged access groups, right? Instead of having PIM groups and stuff like that. So, in addition to PIM
I do
groups.
think we should say that there is value in P1. Is there more value in P2? Yes, but let's be very careful.
Yeah, I
P1's my favorite.
Who said P1?
For we deal with enterprises a lot, right, at Microsoft facing customers. So it's rare I deal with anybody who does not have E5 or P2, but SMB customers and whatnot need to weigh options. But I think more importantly, I think we offer some level of protection for free, right? Like we do entry-level basic MFA for free. There might be some other features I can't think of. You got to start somewhere, right? But you're right, Edward. You're going to get the full Cadillac.
Yeah,
I love all the features.
My thing wasn't to sit here and say P1 was useless. I work with salespeople, so this is part of the conversation that customers say, then why should I go to P2, right? So to get someone, that can give me more collateral to say, hey, this is why. But if you do need to just take advantage of P1, but virtual, whatever your operational constraints are, having it is there. Because if you don't have P2, you got P1. Right? We don't have a P0, do we?
So, Thomas, let me ask you a question. So, in the last, 2-3 years since COVID, and more people working from home, should people be adjusting their policies? Are there specific things you think people should be doing differently than they were before?
I think it really depends on the adoption of the company. I think there were maybe some companies that need to adopt in rush, how I can say that, because hey, we need to kick out teams. We need to enable our companies or our employees to work at home, and then they try to figure the easiest way for adoption. Like, hey, they have already a first tunnel VPN, and then we add the IP address to the trusted name location, and that's our conditional access policy set, right? And now we know the pandemic has a duration and longer than 3 months, and they consider hey, we need to improve the situation. And I think many organizations that has a fast adoption during the pandemic are starting now to review their security settings that they did in the beginning of the pandemic. But the most organization that Fortunately, most of the customers on our side has started the adoption quite earlier than the pandemic. They are continuously improving their policies, and we see more adoption of security signals and adoption of new features, for example, in conditional access, which allows us to bring additional security layers, for example, device filters that allows to restrict access to specific type of devices. So long story short term, I think there's different level of organization. One of them that are really starting during the pandemic and now have to clean up their work, starting with more zero trust approach about conditional access. And on the other side, we have some organization that already started the adoption 4 years ago, and they continue to improve their policies and bringing more additional layers to the CA design.
So thanks.
Yeah, well put, Thomas. That's a good point. We often deal with customers nowadays working from all over the world, right? At home, etc. And in chat right now, there's a conversation about how, in the past, everybody went over the VPN. Everybody needed to access resources on-prem by that method. But once folks, to Andrew's point, at COVID time, everybody went home, VPNs got overloaded, and we needed to now explore how we could harden the environment without having to just force everybody onto that one connection, right? So leveraging trusted devices, trusted identities, patterning, and recognizing when there is a risk associated with that identity logging in from an unknown, different IP address at an unknown time in a weird way. So I think, do you want to touch on how that's evolved, from that old castle and moat style to a more dynamic investigation and risk-based approach for connecting to services?
Yeah, and what is really important to understand, in my opinion, there's a problem if you have inconsistent policies. For example, if you enforce hard requirements for your employees, like you're only allowed to get access from full managed company devices and so on, and you have really strict conditional access policies. But on the other side, you have no policies for guests, and every member of your tenant is able to invite guests. What happens? The people invite their own personal accounts as a guest to get access to the company data and using them on the personal device.
Yeah.
And
users will find a way, right, Thomas? Users
right.
Always find a way.
And that's really important to see. Of course, the answer could be, hey, we need to disable B2B, but that will be not a good option. But I think if you take a look on posture management, you need to see the whole landscape and only use forbidden policies and only see the restriction. As you already said, the end user will always find a way. And you need to find a solution how you can provide restricted access, have it under control. There's beautiful options with MDA, what we can do with restricted access to specific applications. And I think that is definitely something what is underrated in my opinion, and should be double checked if you have inconsistency in your policies across Azure AD configurations.
What about multi-tenancy, nuances, especially around B2B and B2C, right? You could be as solid as you want. And this is one of the conversations I've had with a customer that's trying to do Sentinel and go to an MSSP model, is that they wanted to make, the source tenant their operational tenant. I'm like, don't do that. Create an MSSP tenant and have delegated access on both sides of it. How do you handle this, being able to have this communication when someone is really deep into B2B or B2C?
So, first of all, tenant is our security boundary, in my opinion. That is the first fact. But on the other side, you should avoid to have many tenants. You should really try to reduce the number of tenants. And I like to give some examples on that. if you like to implement Azure AD B2C or you like to host external identities, it could make sense to have, as it nowadays is designed with B2C, it's a separated tenant to isolate B2C identities from the enterprise tenant. I think that's a valid scenario in the past and maybe also in the future that you like to separate them. When it comes to MSSP scenarios, that is also a valid point. But for many other organizations, I would prefer to go ahead with a single tenant and then try to isolate assets within the tenant, because we have a couple of capabilities nowadays, like administrative units that allows also to delegate permissions in a hierarchy way, and not similar like Active Directory in the past, but I think that's not a good example how complex it could be like in AD in the past. But I would say if you like to have isolation, please go ahead and check out what could be done within one tenant before you split down every sub department or sub company in your organization to a separated tenant, because there are also downsizes about multi-tenant scenarios, and it could make sense to keep it in one tenant.
Good point, because that can turn into a management overhead. I hear you.
Yeah.
I've seen that with some financial services companies. They like, okay, if we're going to do this, we got to split it off, but haven't necessarily, to your point, explored all the options available for that isolation within the existing tenant, Thomas. That's an extremely important point. We don't want tenant sprawl. There are scenarios where it makes sense and it needs to accomplish a certain use case where we can't leverage those controls within one, but we really need to manage that tenant sprawl potential. That could turn into a risk itself.
Yeah. And what I heard in the past, that people are more and more thinking about red tenants, like in the past with the red forest model. And for me, it's still important, even you're building a red tenant, a separated admin tenant, that you need to isolate specific groups and assets within a single tenant. Because even the privilege identities and accounts are coming from another tenant, you have still some high privileged workload identities or user accounts, and that will be one of my recommendations in the posture management. Always avoid directory level assignments. So if you have someone that likes to get authentication administrator permissions, I would go ahead and say, let's do a scoped assignment to that, building, for example, an administrative unit, and the users get only the authenticator admin role on the scope for a specific administrative unit. Because Azure AD did a great job in protecting privileged accounts. For example, authentication admin cannot reset the password or the MFA details of a global admin, but there are other unprotected users, like, for example, Azure admins, and Azure admins have maybe access to subscriptions with domain controllers, and we're coming about the whole tiering model that also need to consider in Azure. That is a whole other topic, which is maybe one for the next episode, but I would really recommend to avoid directory level assignments, build a structure in Azure AD and delegate on specific scope instead on the directory level.
Smart.
The topic has been almost exclusively around Azure Active Directory because it's a Microsoft security inside Microsoft, right? What is your experience when you have to deal with multi non-Microsoft clouds? Is it easy, extensible? It's like when someone, I've yet to find a customer that's just using Azure. They're using somebody else's cloud in some form or fashion. How is it to be able to take that framework and then say, hey, we can try to do this in AWS? Is that a struggle, or is it pretty straightforward?
To be honest, most of my customers are running their services in Azure, so I have no daily challenges with multi-cloud scenarios. But I would say one of the downsides or problems in the past was regarding multi-cloud support and, for example, PIM. So if coming back to the topic about privileged access groups, is it possible that, for example, a just-in-time membership to a security group in combination of provisioning a group via SCIM to another app works very well, and what are the scenarios that are supported? Because even within the Microsoft product family, we have some challenges in using privileged access groups, and we have no, or that was some of the limitations in the past, PIM support for multi-cloud providers. So to manage AWS, GCP, and other cloud providers with PIM, it was one of the limitations, right?
It sounds, I'm trying to map your skill set to what an internal role would be at Microsoft. It sounds like you are a security and compliance technical specialist, if you were working over here. So you did mention one of my favorite products, MCAS/MDA. How heavy are you into that as part of your architecture?
When we talk about identity security monitoring, and I don't like to spoil it too much for the next episode.
That's right. That's the next episode. Yeah,
right. But just to give an insight, because that is also related to posture management. We need to consider signals to the time of sign-in, like identity protection. Identity protection would do a great job in user risk, sign-in risk, and get also additional signals like from MDA. But MDA is really important, in my opinion, to get insights after the sign-in process.
Sign-in process.
Yeah, because to see suspicious activity to Office 365, we have some detections here that like impossible travel and other stuff that will be also forwarded identity protection, but also, for example, mailbox manipulation. The inbox rule manipulation will be forwarded to identity protection. So for me, MDA, when it comes to identity security monitoring, it's really important to get insights of the activity and take the signals as an indicator of compromise when it comes to the user account.
Mm-hmm. Cool. We've also, doing this podcast, almost been talking exclusively about Azure Active Directory. I don't remember if this is going to be part of the next show, but how does this tie into, do you take Azure AD and work backwards, or do you secure AD and work upwards?
Okay.
How do you figure that in?
I'm glad we're pivoting to this. I have a question after this. Yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, Thomas.
What about AD? Because AD on premise is still under attack. Right?
Yeah, right. And I think it is very important that even if you are having a hybrid identity implementation, to recognize Active Directory as your source of authority, because the identities will be synchronized from Active Directory. And with Azure AD Connect, we have a system that have the keys to both kingdoms. Because Azure AD Connect could have sensitive permissions for write back to your Active Directory, and Azure AD Connect has also privileges to write objects in Azure AD. Mm-hmm. So I think Azure AD Connect needs to protect in particular because it has potential impact of both environments. And we did some research as part of the Azure AD attack and defense playbook that I written together with Samuel Lampu, an MVP fellow, that what are the risks about Azure AD Connect? And that has also to do with Active Directory security. Like if you are not protecting those servers like domain controllers and the Connect server very well, we have the option to exfiltrate the passwords from the server and using these credentials to sign in with the synchronization service account, right, which has also a directory role assignment in Azure AD, and then starting to create own objects, try to set password. Maybe some of you and also in the audience heard about the soft and hard match stuff. So we can also take over cloud-only objects in Azure AD and write them back to Active Directory. And so there's a lot of room for attacks. And to isolate or protect those assets on-prem, that is, I think, one of the most important things. And don't invest only in Azure AD security. Right. Keep an eye on Active Directory, especially nowadays with the high numbers of attack. But it's also, as I said before, source of authority. And it is also, for many organizations, still the important point about server infrastructure management and other stuff. So,
yeah, unfortunately, my interaction with especially large and legacy customers, their approach to security around AD is it's so convoluted we can't figure it out. Good luck to the hackers, right? Good luck to them if they can figure it out. Maybe they can teach us something, right? But
get Defender for Identity, right, Edward? Just get MDI in there. That's a great starting point. I got
to get it there. I'm preaching that tomorrow. So, this is good information because it allows people to at least have an idea on where to get started. Even though we've said the obvious, that's been talked about for 3 or 4 years. Turn on MFA, get used to conditional access, use PIM if you're not going to have separate cloud admin accounts, and one I always tell people, it's the simple stuff. You shouldn't be administrating your infrastructure with the same account, in my opinion, that you check your email with, right? Nobody's going to attack your own Microsoft.com because it's not routable email unless you turn it on. So why are people administrating it with that? And I know it's administrative overhead, but nobody wants to take their car to get the oil changed until the oil light comes on. Now you got problems. Right? Now we got problems.
Well put.
Any more questions? Rod has been extremely quiet, and I don't trust him when he's quiet. He's up to something.
I'm always up to something. Yeah, just to throw a little lightheartedness into the discussion. Thomas, one of the things I think that we generally hear, and I've heard this actually pretty recently, from these folks, particularly for small, medium business, they just look at MFA or think about MFA and they don't think it's for them. What's the repercussion if you don't do this, right? We don't talk about that enough, I don't think.
Yeah, so I think for most organizations, sometimes it's hard to understand how inclusive MFA could be to their story. For example, no one likes passwords, for example. And I think the most good trigger to introduce MFA always is getting Windows Hello for Business up and running, because then they have a really easy use of strong authentication, MFA, but also a way to kill passwords and the whole process about changing passwords, remember passwords, and all this stuff. If you need to deploy MFA as classic MFA with OTP and the stuff, I think it is a real plugger when it comes to user adoption, because people don't like to have an authenticator app on their phone. There are sometimes concerns to use personal devices for that. So will be my question to you guys. What do you think is the reason that we have such a low adoption rate, especially for small business? Or
well, personally, I think it's just small businesses, small IT pro teams that are supposed to do their IT pro job plus do security, and they're kind of looking at this long task list, and they're thinking about MFA. Well, you know what? I'm a small team. My manager's right next to me in my ear going, hey, we need to do this. We need to do this. And so they're doing the things that they're being told to do. And MFA is just not that high on the list. It's like a project that, they probably want to get to in 6 months or a year, but then other things kind of take precedence, I think.
And I think the other thing is that they'll do it, but their reluctance and reservations are, who's going to manage this? Right? Who's going to manage the initial, flood of support tickets coming in? That hey, I got this pop up and it wants me to put a number in. Should I
Yeah.
do that?
Yeah.
Like, what number is it asking me to put in? It's asking me for my social security number. No, it's not. So it is because it is not that they are afraid of the technology and the benefits. I believe that 7 out of 10 are afraid of the perceived administrative overhead that they're going to have. And you're right. Particularly around this is SMBs, because large companies have a dedicated, IAM department.
Yeah.
Right. The same people that does threat that do not do compliance and do not do, they don't do, identity access and management. Right. Brody can attest to this. He's working some large clients. There are separate entities that do this. So why does my camera go off?
It can be. Yeah, they can have just a dedicated IAM team. Yeah.
Yeah. And
absolutely.
so that seems to be one of the pushbacks. I recently spoke at in the downtown Atlanta office yesterday, and I'll go back next week. The state of the cybersecurity landscape for SMBs. It was sponsored by the Small Business Association, and this is going to strike crazy. Sort of, I had to scratch my bald head. We don't want to implement these technologies because there is a skill. What did you guys say? A skill liability. And I sort of knew what he was talking about. And that's what explain. I go buy this technology. I get it all in. I get one, if I'm lucky, one person, two, if I'm lucky, to run this. And the minute their skills go up,
they leave.
They leave. Right. And now I'm stuck with this thing.
Yeah.
Right. And now they're going to go back and question, well, I was good as I had been because I hadn't had any incidents. I implement all this technology. Now I have a liability. Now I can't find the skill set. And now you put me in a competitive market that I did not want to be in because of the adoption of technology. These are the real things that I believe that sometimes security techies, we forget. It's about business, right? Technology is for 80% of the time across almost every company, unless they are a security company or a technology company, is a liability. Our salaries are high. Our skill sets are hard to replace.
Yeah.
And sometimes there's a perceived threat that we have too many keys to the kingdom, right, to be able to do these things, right? I do believe that is not a death. It's not a doom and gloom, because the industry is starting to see beyond sensationalism of being on TV. Like the Australian company that Metabank, we're not paying the ransom. And they didn't. And then the actors, I think it was Evo, they put out all the customer medical database, including the president of the company, said, we're not paying. We're not doing it. You're going to do it anyway. And if, so it's hard. It's one of those things, excuse my French or excuse my German, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. I am of mindset, I'm going to be damned if I do. Be damned if you do, right? But this is really good stuff.
Hey, Edward, before we go, I would love to pivot back and just talk about something super quick back on that avoiding privilege escalation from on-prem to Azure AD, Thomas, if you don't mind. I know it's late for you. I'm seeing this right now with a customer, and we've got our on-prem Active Directory, and they create all of their identities and service accounts from Active Directory, which are then synchronized to the cloud, right? And then they're leveraging those on-prem built accounts and identities and their cloud twin, as it were, to manage cloud-based applications, to have that hook back into the system, right? And so what this customer is doing on a case-by-case basis is one conditional access policy per application per account, so that that service account stays in its lane and it can't promiscuously attach itself to either other cloud apps, or back down. It can't actually traverse back to things it's not supposed to touch. Do you see that when there's that hybrid identity scenario and you've got one service account or a few per application and you need to keep them in their lane, ensure least privilege? Is that something you work on? You want to speak to that?
So I think there was a couple of side notes in your questions. I really like to bring that down. So first of all, and I think Alex Weinert has published a great blog post about preventing privilege escalation from on-prem to Azure AD. And one of the key points is never synchronize accounts to Azure AD to use them for privilege access. So if I think to have that also clear. So if we have, for example, some privilege accounts in, we like to use an M365, then we should use cloud-only accounts.
Smart.
My personal opinion is the same for on-prem accounts. So if there's no need to synchronize them to Azure AD, please keep them out from Azure AD Connect to synchronize them to Azure AD, to have really an isolation between on-prem environment and M3 or the Azure AD environment. And that means also about the admin workstations. An admin workstation that are using for global admin should be managed in the cloud by Intune, and should be also Azure AD joined only to full separated environment. So
and I'm sorry to cut you off, but I'll forget if I don't do it, Thomas. And it shouldn't be a physical workstation. It should be Windows Virtual Desktop, right? And if you can get that, make them go into the cloud to be able to do work if it's possible to do it. You said something, and just that quick, I had to see you moment, I forgot. Syncing AD accounts. Is this possible? If you have AD Connect, you're going to sync your accounts, especially if you're migrating from Exchange, you're going to 365, whatever that may be, right? You can create groups and put them in an exclusion for synchronization. Does it make sense to put all of your administrative user personalities in the group that doesn't get synced and make them have 2 logins, right? I know it's a headache, but the repercussions of convenience outweighs, the inconvenience. Is that something you've seen done? You recommend that admins that are on premise in AD cannot be synced to the cloud, and if they want to work inside Azure AD or work inside the tenant, they have to log on with their cloud identity? Because I see a customer that does that.
I think the question is, what is the journey of the customer? So if they like to move completely away from on-prem AD, then it could make sense to have a synchronization of the account. But if they really like to split their environment between cloud management and on-premises, and they have also regulatory compliance policies, whatever, to keep some servers still on-prem, then I would strictly exclude those accounts from synchronizing to Azure AD. To keep it on-prem, and they will keep in their environment. And then maybe using organizational unit to exclude them from synchronization, to have it split it also in an organizational unit in Active Directory. Say, this is my 100% on-prem only, and they should never be touched by Azure AD Connect, because we are also talking about the privileges of the Azure AD Connect service account. Because if they need to synchronize and also have write-backs to these accounts, then Azure AD Connect needs permissions to these objects. And if I like to have completely separated, then I would pick them in a OU where Azure AD Connect has no access to them. Only the standard authenticated user permissions that we have. So, but on the other side, if we like to split between on-prem and cloud admins, we need a lifecycle workflow for managing cloud-only privilege accounts. Because if they are disconnected to our source of authority, in this case Active Directory, then we need something that takes care on join or leave a mover process. And then we are back in the game about the question how we like to manage them. And
it's paperwork, sir. It's creating process. It says you work with this governance. Someone has to say, even if it's manual, we're so caught up in this automation piece that we don't check and balance that you should have HR checklist. Guys in security, he left. Did his on-premise account get disabled? Yes. Did his cloud presence get disabled? And then you have to go through. What about his AWS? What about his Google presence? It's paperwork. I don't like to quickly try to throw a technical resolution to something without seeing if this is more process, right? And because you can manipulate process to make sure, and you can learn from process without having to shoot your feet off, right? Foot off sometimes. But I've seen the struggles. Companies that we spend our money on that are huge have people whose accounts are still enabled, and the person resigned 6 months ago.
It's terrible. It's terrible, right? At least quarterly or monthly, and it doesn't have to fall on, we've got security, we've got IT. They're really separate professions these days, but it shouldn't fall on either to make a determination on whether or not X person should have access to Y thing anymore. You really needs to fall on the leaders and the managers and people services, HR, to your point, Edward, to make that determination and inform those teams that, hey, Edward's no longer here, or Edward got demoted. Let's reduce his access accordingly, right? It shouldn't be up to the technical implementer teams, security teams, to try to figure that out. There needs to be buy-in from the organization to help manage that governance aspect, because it's a lot of paperwork, Edward.
Well, and the thing is, we try to get too sophisticated. Create a technical, if you want to have a technical resolution, have something that put in place and say, if this person hasn't logged in 8 days, disable the account. They'll come screaming.
They will.
Right? But let them scream. Right? And I know our European counterparts like to take, 60, 90-day holidays and sabbaticals, right? So we put it in, right? I'm jealous, Thomas. I want to take 30 days sabbatical.
Yeah, Thomas, I'm jealous too. Do you get to take 2-month holidays, Thomas?
So what is the future here? What's the future of these? Is it something like Intra's decentralized ID thing, or is it something else, some other biometric capability? What's the future of this?
So when we talk about user onboarding, offboarding, and so on, I think verifiable credentials has a bright future, because we have nowadays one issue: user verification. Even someone calls the help desk and say, hey, I've forgotten my password, please reset and name me the new password via the phone line. Yeah. So we have no user verification process at the moment. And also when it comes to social engineering, we have at the moment, alongside of the user account, no additional authentication method. Mm-hmm. And what I would like to see in the future is, what is the story about verified ID in Microsoft Entra? We're using a self-version identity during the hiring process, and this is my initial credential or authentication method or verification method to get the initial credentials for my work account and also for my privilege account. That could be interesting, and also as kind of a third factor. So if I'm requesting sensitive permissions, I need to verify my identity and have my strong authentication in place. That could be also interesting, because then not only a compromising of my identity is required for an attacker to request more permissions. For example, about the identity governance model, I have another identity that could be verified. Yeah. So
in the military, I'm ex-Navy. We solved this 20 years ago, and I'm not as deep or as connected as Jock, friend of the show. Come back on, Jock. We love you. We had something called two-person control or two-person authentication, meaning that it is what you had, what you proved, what you knew, and who you knew. So, but before I got to work on a sensitive piece of equipment and everything else, all that permissioning went through, and someone still had to sign and say, I know that guy. You can. I'm sure we can make this a technology thing. That's, if there's a startup out there, we should do it. And it was called two-person control. Someone who had the equal level of you, or the knowledge level that would validate outside of, sort of like an access review. Yeah, you passed all these things, but this guy needs to give you permission. And I know it seems like it's administrative overhead. Who's on call? Who's going to do this? Who's going to answer the email? But I tell you who does it. Pharmaceutical. They're so conscious of their intellectual property. Yeah. They don't take any chances. You get scanned going into Merck, fight you, hold your arms out, right? We need to see. And they are so deep on information protection. They were eating Azure information protection years ago, tracking documents from creation to death, destruction of the document lifecycle. We could learn from some of these companies that are really, really deep into intellectual property and competitive advantage, because they really know, like Nike. Nike knows if you let a shoe design get out, it's going to get copped, and then someone's going to get it. But the problem with Nike and a lot of these companies is they have an acceptable risk because they manufacture 80% of all their stuff overseas, and we know what happens with that, right? I was at a conference, and one shoe manufacturer was not happy that a shoe that's supposed to come out next year was already released in Asia. They got it and they started selling it off brand, and I'm like, But this has been super, 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 super good, Thomas. Thank you for taking time out. To our listeners who don't know, we want to give you a geographical location away specifically, but you're 6 hours ahead. For you to stay up this late, we really, really appreciate it.
Appreciate that.
We really look forward to having you on part 2. And I think, as you and I talked about, maybe a part 3, because there's some very visual things that you can show. And I love to get you on one of our reactor shows, right? Where you can show your stuff, right?
That would
And
be
come
cool,
on
yeah.
and do it. And then,
Thanks for having me.
and then when I come over, I buy you a pint. I need to get over to Germany. I need to work on my German. It's sort of rough. It's bad.
It's Steins in Germany, though, right? It's not pints. It's Steins.
Steins. Uh-oh, the exit music's coming on. I hear it. There we
Who's
go.
that, Rod? Thomas, yeah, thank you. Did you have fun? Was this everything you could have hoped for and more?
Yeah. So as I said, if you come to Germany, just give me a call. Then I can show you the German pints in this
Hey, I'll take you up on it. If you don't know about me, I'll jump on a plane in a minute.
As long as it's in a red cup, Ed'll drink it.
You put it in a red cup, it'll drink it.
That's right.
So thanks to everybody, to all our listeners, supporters, viewers, for the Microsoft Security Insight podcast. Thanks, Thomas Naunheim, for coming over, our IAM expert. We're looking forward to having him on subsequent shows. S. Vitason.
Peace done.
Thanks, everyone. Talk to you next week.